The frost clung to the window panes as Emily adjusted the garland around the fireplace, humming softly to herself. New Year's Eve was fast approaching, and she wanted the house to look perfect for the party. Her husband, David, had been working long hours lately, barely noticing her efforts to keep the festive spirit alive. She told herself it didn't bother her, but deep down, the growing distance between them stung. One afternoon, a package arrived. It was wrapped in plain brown paper and addressed to Emily with no return address. She opened it in the kitchen, glancing over her shoulder to ensure David wasn't around. Inside was a delicate silk nightgown, crimson and laced with black trim. A note was tucked beneath it, written in elegant cursive. For you, because you deserve to feel desired. Yours, A. Emily's breath caught as she reread the note. Her heart raced, a mixture of flattery and guilt flooding her senses. She stuffed the gift back into its packaging and hurriedly hid it in the back of her closet. Later that night, when David asked about the package, she brushed it off as something for the party. He didn't press her. Over the next few weeks, the gifts continued. A pair of diamond earrings arrived with another note, for the sparkle you bring to my life. Then came a designer scarf, followed by a luxurious perfume that left a trail of sensual mystery whenever she wore it. Emily told herself it was harmless, that she'd never act on the admirer's intentions. But it wasn't harmless. And she had acted on it. The first meeting had been impulsive. She'd received an invitation to meet at a small motel just outside of town. She knew it was wrong, but curiosity, and something darker, something thrilling, drove her to accept. Alex was waiting for her, his smile disarming, his confidence intoxicating. He was charming, attentive, everything she felt David had stopped being. That night, Emily wore the crimson nightgown from the first gift. In the dim light of the motel room, she felt a version of herself she thought had been lost, desired, alive, reckless. She convinced herself it would only be once, a stolen moment to fill the void David couldn't seem to see. But once wasn't enough. Emily and Alex began meeting regularly. Sometimes it was at the motel, other times at a rented apartment he used for work trips. On rare occasions, they'd steal moments in her own home when David was working late or running errands with the kids. Emily knew the risk was immense, but the secrecy only heightened the allure. She carefully hid the gifts, stashing them in the back of her closet or beneath a loose floorboard in the bedroom. When David came close to discovering one, she lied effortlessly, the thrill of deception emboldening her. One evening, as David sat at the dining table sorting through receipts and invoices, he paused, holding up a slip of paper. "Did you buy something from Lux & Company?" he asked, squinting at the receipt. Emily's heart raced. She forced a laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, that? It was for a scarf. A gift for Mom. I forgot to tell you." David nodded, returning to his work. Emily exhaled quietly, her pulse still pounding. As New Year's approached, David noticed other changes in Emily. She spent more time on her appearance, her laughter seemed lighter, and she was frequently checking her phone, her expression unreadable. When he asked if something was bothering her, she dismissed it with a smile, assuring him she was just busy planning the party. But David couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Late one night, as Emily slept, he scrolled through her phone, but her messages were clear. Still, a nagging suspicion lingered. The final package arrived 2 days before New Year's Eve. Emily intercepted it before David saw, tearing it open in the laundry room. Inside was a velvet box containing an intimate piece of jewelry, along with another note. "For our next encounter. Happy New Year, my love. A." Emily's cheeks flushed as she held the gift, the reality of her actions crashing down on her. She hid it in her closet and resolved to end things with Alex after the holiday. This affair had gone too far. She loved David, she told herself, and she couldn't jeopardize their family any longer. That evening, as they wrapped presents for the party, Emily accidentally placed the unopened velvet box among the gifts destined for the tree. She didn't realize her mistake until it was too late. The morning after Emily's mistake, she realized with a jolt that she had accidentally wrapped the velvet box and placed it under the tree. Panic gripped her as she scanned the neatly arranged gifts, wondering which one held the damning evidence of her affair. "You okay?" David asked, sipping his coffee as he watched her from the kitchen. "Fine," Emily replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about everything we need to do before the party." David nodded, oblivious to her inner turmoil. Emily's heart pounded as she plotted how to retrieve the gift without arousing suspicion. As the day wore on, David's own unease grew. Emily's nervous energy was palpable, and he couldn't ignore the changes in her demeanor over the past few months. She was more distracted, more secretive, and her laughter, once carefree and genuine, now seemed rehearsed. That evening, while Emily busied herself in the kitchen, David decided to look around. He wasn't proud of the idea, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He started in their bedroom, opening drawers and checking behind clothes in the closet. His search yielded nothing until he found a loose floorboard beneath the rug. Curiosity overtook him as he pried it open. Inside was a small collection of items, a silk nightgown, a bottle of expensive perfume he didn't recognize, and a stack of notes signed with a single initial, A. David's chest tightened as he read the notes, each one more intimate than the last. He felt a wave of nausea as the realization hit him: someone else was sending these to Emily, and she had kept it hidden from him. Emily, unaware of David's discovery, spent the next morning finalizing preparations for the party. She had managed to sneak a peek at the gifts under the tree and thought she'd identified the one containing the velvet box. Her plan was to discreetly remove it before the gift exchange that night. As guests began arriving, Emily plastered on a bright smile, greeting friends and family with practiced warmth. David, however, was uncharacteristically quiet. He watched Emily closely, his mind racing with questions he wasn't ready to ask. During the party, David's sister, Karen, approached him with a glass of champagne. "You seem tense," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" David hesitated before replying. "Just tired. It's been a long week." Karen studied him for a moment before glancing toward Emily, who was laughing a little too loudly at a joke from one of their neighbors. Karen said, her tone thoughtful. "If you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." David nodded, grateful for her concern but unwilling to share his suspicions just yet. As the evening progressed, Emily finally saw her chance to retrieve the gift. While the guests were occupied with hors d'oeuvres and drinks, she slipped toward the tree. Her fingers hovered over the package she was certain contained the velvet box when a voice startled her. "What are you doing?" David asked, appearing behind her. Emily spun around, her face flushed. "Oh, just checking to make sure everything's in order. You know how the kids like to rearrange things." David's gaze was steady, unblinking. "Everything looks fine to me." Emily forced a laugh, stepping away from the tree. "You're right. Silly of me." David watched her retreat, his jaw tightening. He decided to let the evening play out, but he was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. The gift exchange began shortly after midnight. The children tore through their presents with gleeful abandon, their laughter filling the room. Emily's anxiety mounted with every package opened, praying that the velvet box wouldn't resurface. And then it happened. David's nephew, a precocious teenager named Tyler, picked up a small package wrapped in gold paper. "This one's for Aunt Emily," he announced, handing it to her with a grin. Emily's blood ran cold as she recognized the box. She glanced at David, who was watching her intently, and forced a smile as she accepted the gift. "Open it," someone called, and the room echoed with agreement. Emily hesitated, her hands trembling as she peeled back the wrapping paper. When the velvet box came into view, her heart sank. She opened it slowly, revealing the intimate piece of jewelry nestled inside. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. "Wow," Karen said, her voice dripping with curiosity. "That's quite the gift. Who's it from?" Emily's mouth opened, but no sound came out. David stepped forward, his expression hard. "Yes, Emily," he said, his voice cold. "Who's it from?" The room fell silent as everyone turned to Emily, her face pale and stricken. She stammered, searching for an explanation, but the truth was written all over her face. David shook his head, his suspicions confirmed. The party might have been over, but the fallout was just beginning. The aftermath of the New Year's Eve gift exchange was a tense and uncomfortable silence. Emily retreated to the kitchen, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Guests murmured amongst themselves, their glances filled with curiosity and suspicion. David remained in the living room, his expression a mask of icy calm as he avoided the prying eyes of family and friends. When the last guest left and the house finally emptied, David closed the door and turned to find Emily standing near the stairs, wringing her hands. "David," she began, her voice trembling, "I can explain." "Can you?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Because I'd love to hear it." Emily hesitated, her mind racing for a plausible excuse. "It's just a joke," she stammered. "A silly prank from an old friend. I didn't even know it was under the tree." David's eyes narrowed. "A prank? That's your explanation?" He stepped closer, his voice rising. "Do you think I'm stupid, Emily? Do you think I didn't notice the way you've been acting these past few months?" Emily's shoulders sagged under the weight of his accusations. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for this to happen." David's jaw tightened. "Didn't mean for what to happen?" he demanded. "Who is he, Emily? Tell me the truth." When Emily refused to answer, David stormed out of the room. His hands were trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal as he grabbed his coat and headed outside to clear his head. The cold night air bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were consumed with the realization that his suspicions had been right all along. He returned an hour later to find Emily still awake, sitting on the couch with her head in her hands. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red and swollen. "David, please," she said softly. "Let me explain." He remained standing, his arms crossed. "You had your chance," he said. "Now it's my turn." The next morning, David took matters into his own hands. While Emily showered, he searched her belongings for answers. He found what he was looking for in the back of her closet, a hidden phone, cheap and unassuming, but filled with incriminating messages. Each text was more damning than the last, detailing her rendezvous with a man named Alex. There were photos, too, intimate, undeniable proof of her betrayal. David's hand shook as he scrolled through the messages, his anger bubbling to the surface. He took screenshots of everything and forwarded them to his own phone. When Emily came downstairs, she immediately noticed his cold demeanor. "What is it?" she asked hesitantly. David held up the phone. "Care to explain this?" Emily's face went pale. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" David snapped. "What matters is that I know. I know everything, Emily. The gifts, the lies, the nights you snuck out to meet him." Emily sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she said through sobs. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." David laughed bitterly. "Didn't mean for it to go this far? Do you even hear yourself? You didn't just hurt me, Emily. You've hurt our family." David spent the rest of the day gathering his thoughts. He couldn't ignore the pain of Emily's betrayal, but he also couldn't let her actions define his next steps. He contacted a private investigator to learn more about Alex, determined to gather as much information as possible before making his final decision. That evening, David confronted Emily again. "Who is Alex?" he asked bluntly. Emily hesitated before answering. "He's someone I met through work. It started as harmless flirting, and then you decided to destroy everything we built together?" David interrupted, his voice filled with anger and hurt. Emily's silence spoke volumes. The investigator's report came back 2 days later, providing David with all the proof he needed. Alex was a colleague from Emily's past, someone she had reconnected with months ago. Their meetings were frequent, their conversations explicit, and their relationship anything but innocent. Armed with this knowledge, David began planning his next move. He wasn't just going to confront Emily anymore. He was going to end this once and for all. The tension in the house was unbearable. David had spent the last few days avoiding Emily, focusing instead on preparing for what he knew had to be done. He'd reviewed the investigator's report over and over, memorizing every detail about Alex and his relationship with Emily. It was time for answers, and he wasn't going to let her deflect or deny any longer. That evening, David asked Emily to join him in the living room. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made her hesitate. She sat down cautiously, wringing her hands. "What's this about?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. David placed the investigator's report on the coffee table between them. "This is about the truth," he said, his voice steady. "I know everything, Emily. About Alex. About the gifts. About the nights you thought I wouldn't notice you were gone." Emily's face went pale as her eyes darted to the report. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Don't even think about lying," David said sharply. "I have proof. Messages, photos, timestamps. You've been lying to me for months. The least you can do now is tell me why." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far." David leaned forward, his anger barely contained. "Then why did you let it? What was so wrong with us, Emily? What did Alex give you that I couldn't?" Emily buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "It wasn't about you," she said between sobs. "It was about me. I felt invisible. Like I wasn't enough anymore. And Alex made me feel seen." David's jaw tightened. "So your solution was to betray me? To betray our family?" Emily looked up, her eyes red and pleading. "I'm so sorry, David. I know I've hurt you, but I'll do anything to make this right. Please, just give me a chance." David shook his head, his voice cold. "I gave you a chance, Emily. Every single day of our marriage was a chance. And you threw it away." The next day, David arranged to meet Alex. It wasn't difficult to track him down, the investigator had provided his address and work schedule. David waited outside Alex's apartment, his heart pounding as he rehearsed what he wanted to say. When Alex finally appeared, David stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Alex looked startled, but his expression quickly turned smug as he recognized who David was. "Ah, you must be David," Alex said, his tone dripping with mock politeness. "I was wondering when we'd have this little chat." David's fists clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I know about you and Emily," he said. "I've seen the messages, the photos. It's over. You're going to stay away from her and my family. Do you understand?" Alex smirked. "And if I don't?" David took a step closer, his voice low and threatening. "You don't want to find out." For a moment, Alex held his ground, but something in David's eyes made him falter. He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine. Have it your way." She wasn't worth the trouble anyway. David's jaw tightened at the flippant remark, but he turned and walked away, refusing to give Alex the satisfaction of a reaction. Back at home, David handed Emily divorce papers. She stared at them in shock, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. "You can't mean this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean every word," David replied. "You made your choices, Emily. Now I'm making mine." Emily broke down, begging him to reconsider, but David remained firm. The betrayal was too deep, the damage too great. He couldn't see a path forward for them anymore. In the days that followed, David began the process of rebuilding his life. He focused on his work, his children, and finding peace amidst the chaos Emily had created. The pain of her betrayal lingered, but so did a sense of relief. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe again. Emily, meanwhile, was left to grapple with the consequences of her actions. The affair had cost her everything: her marriage, her stability, and the respect of those around her. She had hoped for forgiveness, but now she realized it was something she might never receive. The confrontation had ended their marriage, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter for David. One where he could finally move forward, free from the shadows of Emily's deceit. The day David filed for divorce was marked by a quiet finality. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now echoed with an emptiness that reflected the state of their fractured lives. Emily packed her belongings with trembling hands, her tear-streaked face a mirror of her regret. David moved forward with unwavering resolve. He refused to let the betrayal define him, though the pain still lingered like an unwelcome shadow. His focus shifted to their children, ensuring they felt secure and loved despite the upheaval. Emily's attempts to repair the damage were met with cold indifference. She sent messages, left voicemails, and even showed up at David's workplace once, but he remained firm. "We've said everything there is to say," he told her. "It's time to move on." Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. David kept the house, transforming it into a sanctuary for himself and the kids. He replaced the furniture Emily had chosen, repainted the walls, and removed every trace of her influence. It was cathartic, a symbolic act of reclaiming his life. Emily, now living in a small apartment, struggled with the reality of her choices. Alex had disappeared from her life, his charm fading the moment her world began to crumble. She was left with nothing but memories of what she had lost. One afternoon, David received a letter from Emily. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he wanted to hear what she had to say. The words inside were raw and heartfelt. David. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. Truly and deeply sorry for everything I've done. I betrayed you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you can find it in your heart to understand how much I've hurt myself in hurting you. Take care of yourself and the kids. You deserve happiness, even if it's without me. Emily. David folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. He didn't know if he would ever fully forgive her, but the closure it offered was a small relief. Meanwhile, David began to rebuild his social life. Friends who had distanced themselves during the chaos of the affair now rallied around him, offering support and encouragement. Karen, his sister, became his closest confidant, helping him navigate the challenges of single parenthood. "You're stronger than you think," she told him one evening over dinner. "And the kids are lucky to have you." David nodded, his resolve hardening. He knew his children needed him to be a pillar of stability, and he refused to let them down. One day, as David watched his children play in the backyard, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in months. The laughter that filled the air was genuine, untainted by the bitterness of the past. For the first time since Emily's betrayal, he allowed himself to hope for the future. Emily's journey was far more solitary. She sought therapy to confront the choices that had led to her downfall, grappling with the pain she had caused not only to David, but to herself. The road to self-discovery was long and arduous, but she was determined to find meaning in her mistakes. Years later, David met someone new. Her name was Rachel, a kind and compassionate woman who brought light into his life. Their relationship blossomed slowly, built on trust and mutual respect. Rachel embraced his children as her own, creating a new sense of family that healed wounds David thought would never close. Emily, having found stability in her own way, reached out one final time to express her happiness for David. Though their paths had diverged, she was glad to see him thriving. Her own life was quieter, marked by introspection and a commitment to being better. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy David's world became a turning point. Through pain and loss, he discovered resilience and the strength to rebuild. And as he stood in the backyard, watching his children chase fireflies under the fading light of the day, he knew that the future held promise, and that he was finally free.